So I'll maybe kick us off as we kind of go through the slide deck. But I'm so excited to share, and I know Sharif is as well. We've been waiting all year to do this presentation as part of our grant management series. And the fall is what we chose to do grant management and grant invoicing. And so we're super jazzed you're here. And we hope to be able to continue this type of training in 2025 through the second round of the Tacoma Capacity Building Project. And just so you know, Sharif here in the wonderful Jersey is the man with the plan, and he is our CPA expert and also grant accountant. And if you're curious or would love to schedule time with him after today's presentation, we do have technical assistance hours, and he has time to support you. But you've got to make sure those hours and you connect with Sharif before the 31st of December. So please reach out if you're interested. We'll have contact information throughout the presentation. And also when you signed up for this presentation, that's the same way you can sign up to schedule time with Sharif if you prefer. Okay, I'm going to kick us off. We have a lot to cover and we want to make sure that we have time for your questions. And if you're not sure, this is best practices for grant management, grant accounting, QuickBooks, and grant invoicing. So you get many topics under one umbrella today. Okay. As I mentioned, this is part of the Tacoma Capacity Building Project, which is supported by the City of Tacoma Neighborhood and Community Services Department, and Tacoma Creates Tacoma Arts as well. And we love to share knowledge with any nonprofit within the city or serving the city that has city funding, wants city funding, and just wants to grow their overall capacity. So thank you for being here. So this is not what you'll look like after the presentation, but I know that grant accounting is not for the fearless. So we have Sharif here to help us make it less stressful, but we're going to go and talk about grant management and budgets, grant accounting, QuickBooks, grant invoicing, and then just kind of wrap up the day. So I'm going to kick us off, and we're going to learn a little bit about the grant management process. So we just wanted to put some fireworks in here. It is no small feat to be funded. So for all you grant writers on the call or folks that are pursuing grants, congratulations. Your work is paid off, and now we're going to dive into the grant management phase. So one thing I like to start off with when we talk about grant management is starting up the project. Sometimes it will be quite a few months or even longer before you know that you got a grant, and it's always good to refresh what you said you were going to use the money for. So we encourage folks to review the proposal and then plan for a kickoff meeting with whoever the team is. And the team could be you and somebody that's a program manager. It could be the executive leadership. It could be some board members or volunteers, but we plan for a kickoff meeting for anyone that will be involved in the grant and the execution of the grant. And also the administration of the grant. So like we heard from Bill, so if you have somebody doing the invoicing or billing or helping with the budgets, please bring them in on the kickoff meeting to make sure everyone's on the same page. And on that note, you want to review the scope of work and budget. So is what you said you're going to do still work? Does the budget still work for what you want to do? And then review the project timeline to make sure that the overall timing of the project still works. Sometimes you might have flexibility when the grant is funded to have a negotiation with the funder to make sure everything's relevant. Please use that time to update anything that may or may not work for you. And they may not necessarily give you more money, but they may let you rebudget certain line items if they're more relevant to your day-to-day work. You also want to take a moment and map out the report deadlines. That doesn't need to happen on day one, but usually with grants, and most times there's some sort of report due, whether that is a frequent report, maybe they want you to report monthly, or maybe it's quarterly, or maybe it's once a year, but please write that date down and don't miss that because that's important to communicate with the funder. And also to operationalize and kick things off in a more linear fashion, you're going to talk about startup actions. So, what do you need to do to get the program going? So, you have the kickoff meeting, you've revealed the scope of work. Do you need to hire any staff? Do you need to engage staff that are already hired? Do you need to bring contractors on? Or is there some training? What are those startup actions? So, outline those. Usually startup actions happen within the first few months of the project if you plan that timeline. Day one is usually not a go out and do everything day. It's a day to get organized and be really happy that you have the grant and you're looking forward. You also want to set up a central project file. You might have a couple files, one for the project implementation team, so people doing the work, and one file for folks administering the work. Use your discretion on who has access to the file and make sure you're putting all the documents in there that you need to manage the project. So just a temperature check of the room here. Do you guys follow a similar process when you start up a grant? Is this more formal, less formal? Hopefully there's no new information here in the startup phase. And feel free to use the chat too, but happy to use this time to share knowledge with each other. Okay. So one
Well,
thing,
this
oh,
is Sharon.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I was going to say we do that. I pull together a team and we just discuss, the statement of work and start setting timelines for different sections of the work that we need done. Who's going to do what and and when. We need to establish, what our milestones are going to be, and we follow that. So it's, and and having the right people in place, at the beginning also really helps. So that's kind of what we do, and so far it's worked really well.
And that's so smart to do that at the beginning because people often forget what the grant said. And sometimes they just want to go, but they might go in many different directions. So I love that, Bill and Jennifer have similar processes. You guys are already following best practice. And I think that really helps you get the results that you love to see in your grant. So when we talk about award expenditures and preparing the budget, you want to make sure that, again, we always like to go back to the proposal. What did we say we're going to do? What did the funding announcement say we could use the funds for? And review that budget, or if you need to realign that budget, draft that budget with those costs in mind. And making sure, back to the grant writers that are helping put the proposal in, that the budget reflects actual costs. If you're hiring staff, make sure that you include rate of pay, any taxes or benefits. Ensure you maximized all costs, including programmatic costs. We'll talk a little bit about what indirect or administrative costs are, and also make sure your budget covers your costs. So you don't want to pad the budget, right? You don't want to inflate costs, but you do want to make sure that you've budgeted for everything to do the program and aren't running the program too lean. And also, everything's there. If you find you might need something different, again, in that early startup phase of a project, you might be able to negotiate with the funder to move things around. So we say buckets, but make sure the costs are aligned to the right buckets and you have everything you need to do the work. So awesome. All right. And this is going to help you when we get to the grant invoicing because everything should align. All right. We're going to use some terminology here. I'm sure most folks have heard about these. We typically in a grant budget, there's two primary buckets. One are direct costs. So these are directly related to the project or program. And indirect overhead or administrative costs. So these are costs that are a little more difficult to directly allocate to the program, but they're the cost of doing business, the cost of running the project. And those would be referred to as like indirect overhead or administrative costs. Some funders use a percentage, like you can use up to 10 or 15% of the programmatic costs as indirect costs, right? And others maybe want the administrative costs more clearly outlined, like maybe you have an office assistant or a portion of, bills time doing the finances or the billing, or maybe you have external bookkeeping or other things that may fall into indirect overhead administrative, rent, utilities, other things that it's really hard to quantify to a specific project, but they are more administrative in nature. And as Sharif talks about his part of things, he can tell you like how those might be represented in the grant invoicing process. We do have a citation, so we're using these definitions from the uniform guidance, so the cost principles. We just like to know what we consider this our dictionary, so to speak. So if you want to reference that back, that note is in here. All right, so what are you going to find in a budget? So mostly when you're looking at your grant budget and you're going to manage costs, we were looking salaries and wages, and that's usually the biggest portion of costs. Benefits, taxes, any other things that are related to that might fall within your fringe benefit rate. We encourage folks not just to charge an hourly rate or a salary, but in making sure you're covering all your taxes, any medical or other benefits you may have, so you get full recovery of people costs. Rent, you might also have a rent or utilities cost as programmatic direct costs if you can proportion them to the project you're working on. You might have supplies, like what do you need to do the project? So office supplies, ink, toner, paper, pens, folders, maybe other things are needed to make sure that you have the basic supplies to keep the project going. Phone services, whether that's a cell phone or a landline, if people still have landlines. Internet services, if you are working remotely or if you have people out that need to be connected to you, internet services, we would see those in a budget. And if you're doing outreach or driving a lot of places, you're a road warrior for the project, transportation mileage is also a cost. And these are common costs, but not everything that you may or may not work with. Okay, one thing we did want to point out here in the process, hold on, we were just excluded by it because it was so there. So cost share matching in-kind services. So unless it's required by the funder that you put a portion of costs in, whether it's a cash match, like they're going to fund you $20,000 and you have to put in 10 for a $30,000 budget, or they want you to volunteer or use your staff time that you pay and don't charge back to the grant as in kind or matching services. It's complicated. So we encourage people, if there is a cost share or matching or in-kind requirement, to look at that to make sure your organization can support it, because it's a cost to you and your organization to do the work. It's not necessarily reimbursable by the funder. And in some cases, the funder may ask you to track that time as well. So cost sharing, matching in kind is complicated, treated as such, and it doesn't always make you more competitive. We call these coupon awards or coupon grants. So make sure you can do that before you get into this type of arrangement with a funder. Right. And managing budget to actual expenditures. So we talked a little bit, or I talked some about the budget. So you'll have your budget that is approved by the funder. You've had the kickoff meeting, as Sharon talks about, right? And Jennifer and Bill referred to. What you want to do over time as a good best practice for grant management is track your actual expenditures related to the budget that you proposed. People may use Excel or they might use a different tool. We have links in the slideshow that you can access after the fact, just simple like Microsoft 365 templates that are Excel based, or some people might use a project management system like Smartsheet. It's always good to know where you stand, and especially if you're tracking, project expenses over time. If you'd like to schedule time with Sharif to figure out like if there's a different way to do it or using the best way, we do have our link to our calendar, the same one that you signed up for this presentation to schedule time with him. But this is a great way to keep what you anticipated spending, keep track of that, and make sure you're not overspending or underspending. So Sharif, I'll pause here. Any best practice guidance from you from your grant accounting view on budget to actual?
Um, yeah, I think that one of the things, and I was thinking about this a couple slides back when you're talking about some of the planning with respect to the budget. One of the things that we definitely want to understand is that a lot of grants are reimbursable grants, and so you're going to have expenses, you're going to be expense heavy, and then you're going to be able to invoice. Sort of after that. And so you want to make sure that if you're on cash basis in particular, you want to make sure that your budget is reflective of that. This is when we're going to be able to spend this money. This is when we're going to be able to spend that, and whatnot, so that you're actually doing sort of an apples to apples, comparison with respect to your budget to actuals. Like Angela's mentioning, Excel and a variety of other tools are potential ways of doing that. One thing to keep in mind is that some people are Excel masters and they get in there and they create these amazing spreadsheets with all kinds of things and they leave the organization. And then you don't have another person that is an Excel master, and all of a sudden you have this beautiful, wonderful template and something goes awry and now you can't do anything with it, and you have issues. So make sure that if you're using stuff like that, that someone doesn't get too extravagant, too excited, and do too many things on there, so that there's not other folks in your organization that are able to follow behind and duplicate that, or were something to happen.
Thanks, Sharif, and that's a great point there. One thing to talk about Excel too, whether you're an Excel ninja wizard or you're just trying to work your way through it. Remember your budget to actual tool, whatever you use is a tool. And Excel, we are human. And so sometimes the formulas break down or they don't quite work or the things don't add up. So make sure your tracking budget to actual tool matches your finances, like your invoices, your expenditures, your receipts. The two should match. If you're finding a discrepancy, that's where you need to dig deeper because something is off. Either it wasn't calculated correctly in your budget to actual tool, or maybe it was missing, etc. So one place where people may get stuck as the time of the grant matches on, right? And it's cost reimbursable and everybody's busy, is sometimes the budget to actual tool gets off kilter with what the invoices are or should be, or the expenditures. And you could potentially exceed what you have in your budget in certain categories or under report when you're doing your invoicing. And that's just going to make it more difficult as you move on. So we encourage, checks and balances in the system, and you might have capacity to do that every day. Maybe you are that Excel ninja that just lives and breathes for tracking this information, or you might do it on a monthly basis. We recommend, I think, no less frequently than quarterly because it's hard to go back and reconcile costs, but just keep that in mind with whatever tool you use. Anything to add there, Sharif? Okay, perfect. All right. Reporting requirements. Remember, we talked about that. You mapped it out in your kickoff meeting. You're like, yes, and we're going to do that. So reporting, there could be a few different things that you report on. It could be people served, financial reports, money spent, whatever the funder or sponsor wants you to report on, please do, and get that on time and maybe even early. Use their templates, follow their guidelines. And again, it's super important to meet deadlines. So if you're not meeting deadlines, it potentially could impact the funding you receive, or it could impact the funding you might receive in the future. One thing, again, as a best practice we encourage groups to follow is don't let the funder remind you that you missed a report. Please plan for that. Just as you'd plan for maybe your favorite friend's birthday, please plan for this just as a special occasion as well. Even though it's not as fun as a birthday, you want to be tracking all the reports and get those in on time. Okay, so everything is going well on your grant, right? And then it's not. So how do you address if you have a surprise or something unexpected happens? Like Sharif said, maybe somebody transitions off the project. We talked about being off track. Maybe you said you were going to serve all these clients in Tacoma and then nobody's engaging in your program. You're not able to meet your deliverables. You have more to do than the budget will cover. Oh my gosh, what's happening, right? Let's reflect back to COVID, right? That was so unexpected. Nobody could prepare for that. They had to pivot. You missed a report. Again, transitions in staff. So what are some things that you may or may not have experienced when you are off track with your project or your budget? Love to hear from anyone on the call just to give us your words of wisdom.
Well, this is Sharon again, and this occurred during COVID. In running our shelter, one of our primary goal is to get people permanently housed and, to keep our numbers up, in the shelter. And with our contracts, people weren't supposed to stay as long as they did. There was nowhere we could move them because it was COVID, and there was this kind of like a pause on people opening up their establishments to anybody. So what I did was stay in contact, with the funder. And I think that's probably one of the best things that you can do is to form a relationship with somebody, in that funding organization that you can go to and talk about, what your problem is, what your issue is, and it works out because, you're talking to another human being who understands essentially the systems. And if there's something that you really have no control over, then that's something you bring up, to your funder. It's not that you're slacking off or not trying to do your job, but the world doesn't really just revolve around you. So, having that great conversation, having a great relationship, with your funder, I think is one of the most beneficial things you can do. Because in my experience, I found that they even offer advice. They can come up with maybe some additional ways that you can address a situation or even articulate it, in a report. So, yeah, that's what I would say. Form that relationship and keep it going. And not just, you don't have to wait till your funding report is due. Talk to them in between.
So great. I love that, Sharon. And were you able to get resolution for the situation you experienced in COVID? Were you able to solve that problem?
Yes.
Yay.
Yes.
That's even better.
We were able to, get extension, so it worked perfectly.
So great. And thank you for sharing that. Yes, a relationship with the funder is super important. And I do think that sometimes when we work with groups, they're afraid to approach the funder because they don't want to get in trouble, whatever that is, air quotes, right? But not like having that communicating with the funder, because the funder at the end of the day wants you to be successful, right? They gave you money, you're part of this amazing project, they want you to do well. And reaching out and engaging them when you're trying to address something that you didn't expect is really great. And reaching out to them early in the process. What you want to do is, if you have a 12-month project, you don't want to wait till month 10 to say, oh my gosh, we haven't been able to do anything on this project because we're stuck. You want to involve the funder early and see, as Sharon pointed out, maybe they can help you troubleshoot or problem solve or give you an extension. But it's all about that relationship. Anyone else would like to share as we go through a few more slides here? If not, then that's okay. We are all family here today, all in the grant management family. Okay, reimbursement and payment. So we're getting closer and closer to Sharif's time with us today. So as we talked about, many of these grants that you receive might be cost reimbursable. So you want to make sure that you're setting up for reimbursement and payment. Read the contract. The contract will tell you what those, how to go about that process. Or there might be supplemental materials once you've got a grant that the funder wants you to follow. So make sure you understand what those invoicing processes are. Make sure you complete the template and only are billing for costs that you have improved in your budget. Provide supporting documentation that is key. Make sure you can support the expenditure and follow all deadlines. Sometimes as folks get busy in their nonprofits, invoicing may lag, and two key indicators of performance for you receiving a grant are getting your reports in on time and getting your invoices in on time, and also the pace that you spend your money. So you want to be pretty much on track as you go through your expenditures on your project. You don't want to be ahead of the game. If you have a 12-month grant, you don't want to say, well, we did everything by month 6 and we're good, right? There is no extra prize for finishing a grant early. You want your grant to be paced and finish at about that 12-month mark. And you don't want to get again to month 10 and be like, oh my gosh, we haven't done anything on this grant. We need to do everything in 2 months. So again, pace yourself. It's like a marathon, not a sprint, and make sure that you're ready for reimbursement and payment. Hey, Sharif, we are going to bounce it over to you, and we're going to talk about grant accounting.
All right. Well, I am going to I'm going to do my best to not put everyone to sleep. I know that other than I know that one person was a CFO, so maybe other than that person, maybe everyone else will be falling asleep during my presentation. I will do my best to make it as exciting as accounting can be, which, let's be honest, not that exciting. Right. So, we have grant accounting. Maybe you've heard of cost accounting, management accounting, public accounting, all you accounting people just throwing these names out here. But from my perspective looking in, aren't they all kind of the same? Yeah, they kind of are the same, but there are actual nuances, there are differences, and in some cases the differences are pretty significant, to the point that someone may be very good at kind of general accounting or whatnot, and they really have no idea of how to do grant accounting. And so we're going to just kind of talk about grant accounting, right? So like, what does that even mean, grant accounting? So, I kind of put this little definition up here, right? So it's a specialized area focusing on managing funds from grants, ensuring compliance, and maintaining transparency, right? And it includes all these areas that are here, right? So the first one being compliance with grant terms and conditions. So like Angela talked about, right? You're going to have your kickoff meeting. You're going to kind of go over all of the parts of the grant, all of the important things or whatnot, and then we're going to start spending money. And we want to catch any issues in the spending of the money before we're submitting invoices, right? We want to know that no, these are okay. This particular, we're following the terms and conditions. We're spending the funds in the manner in which we, had told the grantor that we were going to spend them. And so grant accounting is one of the areas where we're going to try to kind of catch that, before anything gets out of hand. The accurate tracking and reporting of expenses. Now you might say, well, wait a second, like we already accurately, track and report expenses, in our general ledger and our general accounting. And while that may be true, there are specific things that have to be, tracked and reported with respect to the grant, and specific things that can only be charged to the grant, like was discussed earlier. And so we're going to have our general ledger for the whole organization, right? but we're also at the same time going to need to track and accurately track specific expenses for this particular project. And we'll kind of get into that as we go on, but we're doing the two things right at the same time. And so we have to make sure that we have a system in place to where everything that's related to the grant is being tracked. It's being tracked in a very, clear, transparent manner, and it's very easy to pull reports and understand where it is that we are at any point in the process. Grant accounting also talks about budget and cost allocation. Budgeting was kind of discussed earlier on, so I'm not going to go into that much. Cost allocation might have to do, as Angela talked about, with something like the rent or some other thing or whatever, where they may be asking for, as she mentioned, instead of a percentage of overhead, they want to know, like, what exactly is it and how are you determining, this amount, right? I mean, an example of a cost allocation might be something simple that, okay, we have 10 employees, 4 of them are working on the grant, so 40% of the rent, is what we're going to try to, recover for this project. That would be a simple one. There's all kinds of different ways of doing it. And the last one is the audit readiness. And we all know, oh, IRS audit, oh my God, I don't ever want to hear those words. Well, that's not what we're talking about here. So generally speaking, as we go kind of up in our funding, right, we're going, the funders are going to require that we have financial statement reviews. They may require that we have financial statement audits. You might have to get, the government audits, right? I mean, so we always want to start out from the beginning of the process once we're receiving grants, having our books in a manner that if whatever funder is requiring that we have an audit, that we're already ready for it, that we're not going to try to, build the car as we're driving, so to speak. Angela, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so why is it important, right? So obviously, it ensures funds are used as intended by the grantor. Again, right, we want to have as many sort of like checks and balances along the way, right? You're going to have to make sure that, there's someone on your team that's approving expenses, right? Making sure that the expenses are in fact aligned with with what's in the grant. And then of course also then, the people that are going to be cutting the checks and doing all those things. Also, that's another area where you can make sure that everything is being intended, is being used in the way that the grantor intended it. Building trust and credibility with funding agencies, right? Like, they really don't like that they gave you all these funds and then they see that everything is sort of like in shambles from a record keeping perspective, right? It's really super important that, whether they're doing site visits, whether they're just asking for something, that you can provide what it is that they're asking for, like, immediately, right? You have the capability, oh, here's what we spent on this, here's the receipt for that, whatever it is, we can just kind of grab it at the snap of our fingers. Or if they come on site, that you don't have just stuff all over the place, but you can easily access things. You can easily show them where you do things, how you do things. That makes it so later on, right, when you maybe want another grant from them, they trust you. Maybe you get the reputation, out there or whatever from other funders, that not just are you doing fantastic work, but you know how to track everything that that you're doing. Obviously, it prevents financial mismanagement. Mismanagement in this case is using the grant funds for something other than what they were intended for. Grant accounting is specifically really, on one side meant to do that. And then, of course, it facilitates transparent and accurate reporting, right? If you have a system where you can just click a couple of buttons and it spits out reports or whatever, then that's fantastic. And a lot of the software, and we'll talk about maybe one example of the software here in a bit, but most modern software or whatever, as long as we're entering things on a regular basis, reconciling things on a regular basis, making sure that all the things that are supposed to be matching are matching, then when the reports come out, it's a simple process, they're accurate, they're clear, and they're what funders are looking for. Next slide, please. Yeah, so some tools for effective grant accounting. Like, I can't stress enough the first one, right? Like, having software is like, it's makes it makes it so much easier to to do all the things that were just mentioned on some of the other screens, right? I mean, QuickBooks is one that we're going to kind of talk about here in a minute, because it's, there's a low entry barrier to QuickBooks, right? It's not super expensive. It doesn't require that you have expert accounting staff already there, CPA level staff or something like that already on your on your team. And there's, billions of YouTube videos, trainings, all kinds of stuff that can pretty much show you like everything that's there. But accounting software in general versus Excel. So we're talking about Excel a few slides back. And so like I mentioned there, the idea that someone has this wonderful Excel document or spreadsheet or whatnot, and then they leave and other people don't have the ability to maintain that. Like this is like a common problem. We go in, to a lot of organizations that have, different issues with their accounting and stuff like that. And it's a common thing that you see. You go in and you see the spreadsheet, and there's all kinds of stuff that's, links that are broken and macros that aren't working and all these kind of things because the person that did all that stuff left and no one else can do it. That's one sort of negative of the use of Excel. Another negative of it is that oftentimes, though not always, you can set it up to automate, but oftentimes it's going to require the operator to be doing something, whether that's entering formulas, whether that's making sure they match, all the links are there, whether that's hand keying, some stuff in, or whatever. Whereas with most accounting software nowadays, you really don't have to do too much of that. A lot of it is automated. The reporting is much easier. And there's modules within it to specifically track, grants, or other projects. Also, you want to have, budget management tools. Again, most softwares are going to have those kind of management tools. That would maybe be a place where, you might have an Excel spreadsheet as a, secondary check on kind of what you're doing, so that if you find that, something doesn't kind of sit right, doesn't look right, you can have sort of something that you can check it against. Um, again, having compliance tracking systems, within your internal control processes, right? Now, again, whether that is making sure that the person that's approving things, truly understands what isn't allowed with respect to the grant funds. And then also, of course, making sure that whomever is doing your accounting, cutting your checks, all those kind of things, that also that person is, understands all the compliance related stuff. And going back to the kickoff meeting, like one of the things that we find sometimes is that there's this great kickoff meeting and everybody understands sort of their role within the grant or within the project, but they don't understand their responsibility when it comes to documentation for expenses that they incur. And so it's really super important as part of that process that the people that are going to be expending stuff, and whether that's with a credit card, whether that's, their own funds that they're being reimbursed for, like whatever the methodology is that's gonna take place, that they understand like what those requirements are. So you don't get into situations where, someone is like, oh yeah, sorry, I lost the receipt. Oh well. No, that's going to be a problem. And reporting and analytics platforms, again, right? Oftentimes that's going to be within your accounting software, but you want to make sure that your reporting function is something that is very clear. It's very easy to read. It's not all, I mean, to be honest with you, it's not all accounting-y with all kinds of stuff on it, and things like that. You want to make sure that it's clear, and analytics platforms just make it easy for you to track everything. Next slide, please. Yeah, and so one kind of easy way to sort of do all those things that we were just talking about is QuickBooks Projects. And QuickBooks Projects is sort of, I mean, I'm going to call it a module. They call it a feature, whatever. But it's within QuickBooks Online. And it allows you to track income, expenses, profitability, whatnot, for individual projects or individual grants. And it's super useful, like I mentioned here, right, when you have to monitor the financial performance of specific projects or specific grants. If we go to the next slide, it just kind of shows, yeah, the key features here, right? So, you can budget for individual grants. So as I'll show you in a slide coming up here, you basically click on projects, and it opens up into like you can call it a dashboard, and it'll have every one of the individual grants or projects that you might have there. If you only have one, obviously that's easier. If you have four or five, they're all there on the screen. You have sort of at a glance views of kind of what's going on with each one of them. When you click into them, then you can get more detailed information. It helps you to track grant income and expenses. There's real-time grant reporting. Like I said, there's dashboards in addition to the ability to just run a report specific for that grant. Like I said, and again, like it says here, easy to use dashboards so that you have all kinds of different insights into how things are going. On the next slide here, I think we're going to get a
Yeah. And
yep.
can we ask if anyone uses
Mhm.
QuickBooks? Or let me just take a read of the room. How many of you guys use QuickBooks or another software management system for your finances? Okay, Sage. Great. Sage 50. So I'm going to assume that's either the 50th version or it's really good. Okay, QuickBooks Desktop. Great. You should feel free to pop in the chat if you want. Yes, I think Sharif speaks many words of wisdom. Ooh. Oh, Sage 50 only means bare bones. Well, there you go. Thanks, Bill. All right. And for my grant management hat, QuickBooks project is because you want to, best practice is to track each grant individually, regardless of the funder type. And especially when you get into federal funding or other things, they really don't like their grant touching others, right? They don't like commingled funds and they don't like it just to play with others. They want it to be its own grant. And as Sharif talks about like best practices for audits and stuff, knowing where your grants are and how the money is going in and out is super important for compliance. Great. So it looks like most folks use QuickBooks and then Bill has Sage 50. All right. Thanks, guys. Go ahead, Sharif.
Yeah, next slide.
I thought I did, but let me click it again. Do we talk about project management and financial transparency?
Oh, no, you're right. We did not.
Yeah. Well, there's more
Yeah, so these are
benefits.
yeah, sure. Yeah, so these are just some of the benefits of QuickBooks projects. And I want to note too, right? Like there's other examples of this in other software, right? Like it's not only Intuit or QuickBooks or whatever that has this. Almost every software has a version of projects or project management stuff that's within it. I mean, like everything else, right? Like often it's a buy up feature, right? Like you have to buy up to get to that level. But places like TechSoup and stuff like that will often have, a really, significantly discounted rate for you to be able to buy up to the level that has some of these modules. And while I'm going to go through some specific slides here in a minute with QuickBooks projects, I mean it's similar with other other means of being able to track or other modules that are similar to this in other types of software. So the benefits that are mentioned here, right? Streamlined project management. It has all the tools that are necessary for project management, from timekeeping, the layout of the project, different, you can put different goalposts or whatever, sort of along the way to make sure that you're on track. It's much easier with respect to the financial transparency of each individual project or grant. There's a lot of automation features just within the program itself that save you time, and there's enhanced decision making because there's a lot of different insights that you can get just from looking at it. And again, all of these kind of things, they're not unique to QuickBooks projects. They can be in any software sort of project management um, uh, module or whatnot. Next slide. Yeah, so for anyone that has QuickBooks Online, on the left-hand scroll bar, you'll go down under, generally it's under payroll, though it kind of depends. But you'll see where it says projects. So if you go to your QuickBooks Online and you go there and you don't have it, yeah, that means you don't have the level of QuickBooks or whatever that's required for this. And like I said, TechSoup and in places like that or whatever, you often can get sort of that higher level uh, subscription or whatever at not much of a different price. Next slide. So this is what QuickBooks Projects looks like, right? So you open it up and it'll have all of your projects, there. You can see kind of in the middle, you have sort of your little graphs and numbers with income and costs. You have profit margin if that's important. Time, from your time sheets or whatnot. And then, obviously on the top right, you can sort of do new projects. Up in the left-hand side underneath the word projects, you can look at in progress ones. You can look at ones that are completed. You can look at, whatever, all time. You can look by every, customer, and that's going to be the name of your grant in essence. You can look by every customer. You can, limit it to one or two or whatever it is. But again, right, like whether we're using QuickBooks Projects or whether we're using another software's module or whatever, they should all be kind of similar to this, and that you're just going to get a snapshot of everything that's going on, and obviously you're able to filter by the one that's that you really want to know more information by. Next screen. And so this is if you clicked into like an individual project, right? When you click into an individual project, you're going to have your income and costs are going to be right there. If you have hour or time or whatever, that's going to be down there where it says hourly time costs, right? And that's going to have all your like your time sheets and all those kind of things. Expenses are going to be down there. And then as you see across the top, right, you can do transactions to get like some significant detail on transactions, time activity if you want to know about what's going on there, and of course the reports, right? You can get very simple, very transparent, very clear project reports, just from there. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is an example of just like a bill, like in QuickBooks. And the main thing, so this is to me or whatever. And so the biggest thing here is you see sort of in the middle of the screen, there's that kind of highlighted in green kind of white check mark under the word billable. And just by checking that and then putting the name of the grant, it's going to show up when you want to go invoice. So when you want to go invoice now, this particular payment that you made, right? We paid, this person as part of the grant. So now when we go to invoice, it's going to bring up on the right-hand side, it's going to bring up everything that we paid. So we can just easily add them right onto the invoice, and we don't have to go kind of like searching around and all those kind of things. On the next slide, I think is the example of an invoice. Yeah, so this would be sort of what an invoice looked like. I kind of made it small so that I wasn't divulging any client information or whatnot. But in this particular case, right, so this is just a open invoice, it just says tax credit grants or whatever. And then all on the right-hand side, you can see these billable expenses. So these were expenses that when they were paid, that checkbox was marked. And so now when we go to invoice, they're all going to show up on the right-hand side. We can just click add, and it will automatically create the invoice with all of the relevant expenses. This is also a good way for you to kind of, spot check, right, what's there, right? All stuff is there, and you're kind of looking at it and you're like, yeah, I don't know if that's really relevant to this grant. Maybe there was an error or whatnot. But it's a very easy way for you to be able to track your grants. It's a very easy way for you to be able to invoice, run reports, and do all these things. And so I highly recommend QuickBooks Projects, or again, if you have different software, the module that they have within that, if you're going to be doing a lot of work with grants. Next slide. Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned, right, like QuickBooks in general, and QuickBooks Projects as well, right, Intuit, right, they kind of, they've kind of monopolized the market or what have you. But because of that, right, there is like billions of, I think I said billions last time, we'll go to trillions. There's trillions of, videos and other things or whatever for, trainings, I guess we can say, for the use of these. There's two here that'll be, you'll be able to follow the link on the slide about how to set it up, right? How would you set up QuickBooks Projects, and then sort of like how do you use it with a lot of examples to make it pretty easy for even someone that's not really well versed in grant accounting or whatever to be able to understand how to use it. Next
Great.
slide, please.
And we're going to kind of ease into grant invoicing, but for folks that are using QuickBooks, is this how you use it? Or I know sometimes people might use a class system versus a project-based system in QuickBooks, but feel free to share if you'd like to kind of just share with the group. Okay. All right. We're saying quiet silence means that everybody's like, yeah, dazed and confused, or actually just in awe. Or, finishing up lunch. Okay, Sharif, kick it off with grant invoicing.
For sure, for sure. Yep. I mean, like I was concerned with, the putting folks to sleep. So we'll try to kind of wrap it up and then give opportunity for questions. Yeah, so when we're talking about grant invoicing, it's a little bit different than other kinds of invoicing, right? Like generally speaking, like we just send, we just have the paper invoice, right? We just send it off to, to someone, and we might have some little detail there or what have you. And like we're good to go, right? But grant invoicing, obviously here, involves billing the funding agency for expenses incurred under the grant terms, right? And so all the parts of it, right? Preparing detailed invoices with supporting documentation. So that's one of the things that's very different. So often, right? Often there's sort of a template, right? There's a template, and you go into it, and you fill out the different categories, right? The different expense categories on the grant. There might be another tab where you give a little bit more detail, and then included with all of that has to be all of the backup, right? All of the different, whatever the expenses were, whatever the method was that the expenses were paid, you have to make sure that all of that backup is there. And you want to make sure that you really have a couple of people kind of go through and check that, one, the backup is for the relevant period, right? So if we're billing someone from October, and there's a bunch of stuff that's in there that's dated like November 1st or November 2nd, because that's going to be a problem, right? People are going to flag that as, well, wait a second, this isn't in the period that you're invoicing for. So you want to check for things like that. You want to check for being clear and transparent. So if you have, a $2,000 invoice for, a variety of things, but only one line item on that invoice is something that you're looking to be reimbursed for, yeah, circle that, highlight it, have notes, make it like very clear to the to the funder, whatever, that this is what I'm looking for. Also, when you have receipts, make sure they're itemized, right? You don't just want like a Costco receipt that just says Costco 27 items, $400, and you're attaching that. That's going to get rejected and sent back. You want to have itemized receipts that are showing that all of the things that are on a particular invoice are they're compliant with the terms of the grant. And there's nothing that is more problematic, right, than having invoices that are not that don't have adequate supporting documentation, right? Because you send them and there's often a lag, right? You send the invoice, then you're waiting to get paid, waiting to get paid, waiting to get paid, and then all of a sudden you find out, whoops, we have to reject this because this doesn't have the documentation. Then you're going to have to fix that. You're going to have to submit it again, waiting to get paid, and so on. And so you want to make sure that you're doing all of that work on the front end to make sure that you just don't have a lot of problems in getting your funding, again, particularly if you have a reimbursement grant, right? So, if you've spent a bunch of money and you like really need that grant money to come in, and then there's issues because there isn't supporting documentation on the pardon me, on the invoice, or there's not detail enough on the invoice to show kind of how something is fitting in a particular category or whatnot, that's going to be a problem. So it's super, super important. Obviously, as it mentions here, right, part of grant invoicing is, again, ensuring compliance with their requirements. And, there's the compliance that we talked about before, with respect to like making sure that everything is an eligible expense and all that. But there's also compliance with how they want you to invoice, right? Some of them have particular ways that they want you to invoice them, whether it's through some kind of portal, whether it's a particular type of document, whatever it is, right? So you also want to make sure that whatever their requirements are for invoicing, that you're meeting that you're not doing it in a way that's different than what they're looking for. Obviously, in invoicing, you want to make sure that you're tracking your payments and your receivables. In particular, if you have a grant where there's sort of a similar amount that you're kind of invoicing every month, it's easy to think that they paid you for 2 months ago when in fact it's just last month's payment, right? And so you want to make sure that you're able to match the payment that you got with the invoice, right? Because if there was one from a couple months ago, you have the same amount from last month, you get paid, and you think, oh, that was a couple of months ago. You're not going to know, oh, whoops, there was a problem with that invoice. Either they didn't receive it, I didn't submit it. There was a problem with it. It got like whatever the issue might be, you wouldn't even know that there was an issue because you just keep thinking, oh, that's from 2 months ago. That one's from 2 months ago. And so it's super important to track the payments, the receivables, match them with the invoices so that you don't kind of skip over one accidentally. And part of invoicing is maintaining the clear financial records, right? So that means that you have to be reconciling things on a consistent basis. You have to make sure that with the clear financial records that you have your approval chains, that you have everything that's necessary to be in compliance with the grant. All that has to be in place so that when invoicing time comes, right, we can invoice seamlessly, we can get paid seamlessly, and everybody's happy. Next slide.
Sharif, as we transition to the next slide, one thing that you brought up earlier, which I'm really curious about, can you speak to like cash versus accrual-based accounting methodology? Just as I push buttons to go to the next slide. So folks might be on different methods, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that and how that impacts invoicing.
Sure. So, I mean, cash method is basically you're recording things when the payment's made, right? And accrual method is you're basically recording things for lack of, it's a little bit more to it than that, but in the period that that the stuff occurred, right? So, for example, let's say that there was stuff in October, but we received the payment, or in November. On cash basis, we're going to record that in November because that's when we received the payment. On accrual basis, we're going to record it in October because that's when we invoice, because that's when the activity was occurring. So they are two different methods. They can be drastically different in how that shows up on profit and loss statements, how it shows up in a variety of ways. For organizations that are cash basis, well, one, you have to make sure that the grantor wants it on cash basis, right? Do they want cash basis? Do they want accrual basis, right? I mean, you have to make sure of what they're looking for. But I think that the main thing that I see is that people don't know what basis they're on. And what happens is in certain software, QuickBooks is an example of it. In QuickBooks, you can create invoices all the time, even though you're on cash basis, right? And so it will create stuff that looks weird, right? It looks weird, it's wrong, it's not actual kind of real cash basis. It's sort of like a modified way that it's doing it or whatever. And so if we're on a particular basis, just making sure that we're consistently doing things in that manner. If we're on accrual, fine. Then whatever the invoice date is, we're putting that's when we're incurring the expense or recognizing the revenue, whatever that happens to be. Fine, we get the payment whenever we get it. We apply it to the invoice, but still, right, the period where all the activity is happening is the invoice period. And if we're cash basis, okay, then we're getting it, we got the money here, that's when we're recording it, and that's what we're doing. And just making sure that it's being done in a consistent basis, because it often isn't. There's often sort of a mix between the two of them. So then when you when you run reports, particularly in some of the modern software or whatever, you're gonna get some stuff that's kind of wonky and sometimes doesn't tie out. So I think those are sort of the the biggest things, I think, when it when it comes to that. So best practices in grant invoicing. Right. So clearly define allowable costs in the grant agreement. So, obviously making sure that we're all on the same page, right? I mean, you don't want to think that a particular expense is going to be acceptable and allowable and reimbursed based on language that's not clear, right? And then you submit it, and then the grant folks are like, yeah, sorry, but that's not what we said we would fund, right? You want to make sure that everything is very clear. And so when you have, pardon me, when you have costs on the invoice that you're wanting to get reimbursed for, you want to make sure, again, the name, it's very clear, the backup is very clear. It's very clear to anyone looking at it that this is in fact an allowable cost based on the agreement. And you don't want to have nebulous stuff that's up to the person that's approving the payment to sort of decide whether or not something is acceptable or not. Because even if later on you can make the argument that it is acceptable, again, there might be that sort of delay in you receiving the funds. Again, right, maintaining thorough documentation for all expenses, right? Like really unacceptable to have someone be like, oh, I lost the receipt, I can't find it, I don't have backup for this, whatever. No, we want to be very, very consistent in making sure that we have documentation for all the expenses that we have and that there's nothing that's slipping through the cracks. And again, that's going to require kind of education and training on the front end before people incur expenses. The use of automated invoicing tools. I mean, example, like in QuickBooks projects, and there's a variety of other ones or whatever, to make sure that you're not, hand keying a bunch of stuff in, and that there's, a lot of opportunity for error and, cell formula error and all this kind of stuff or whatever. You want to automate the process as much as you can, remove the risk of human error as much as possible. And again, right, again, just reconciling the invoices with the payments received, like we talked about in the last slide. Super important, in particular, if you're getting sort of roughly the same amount on a continuous basis. It's easy to not know that that one of them was missed. And I think that's kind of the end of the presentation. There's, I think, one more conclusion slide. You can kind of maybe read that if you'd like, Angela.
So yes, so with this effective grant accounting and with tools, again, tools are your friend, and robust invoicing practices, you're going to be able to kind of just breeze through the compliance for grants and be successful in the management of your grant funded projects. And so, grant management and grant accounting, those things should go together, just like salt and pepper on your dinner table, right? So you want to make sure that you have both and people are supporting both of those functions. And also, we didn't speak to this in this slide, but having like a grant manager or program manager and somebody that does the grant accounting is a good best practice for internal controls, because you don't want one person to try to do everything and balance the books, because that person is too close to the money and there's no other second set of eyes like to double check. As Sharif mentioned, when you're looking at invoices, we want to have a double check from somebody else to make sure the math makes sense, that this actually fell within the program period, the costs are allowable, etc. I think when CPIN, sometimes we have a third set of eyes, depending on what we're looking at, because we want to make sure nothing's missed. So if you have questions, Sharif is here to answer them in this meeting, but also you can schedule a one-on-one technical assistance appointment with him at no cost to you because of the capacity building program. If you have grant management questions, I'm happy to answer your questions. And Sharif and I, we have multi-skills, so we can help you answer questions regardless of the funder type. So federal, non-federal, philanthropy, somebody gave you a check, you want a check, you're not sure, some days you're cash accrual, some days you're accrual, right? If your hair is on fire, we want to make sure that we can calm those concerns you have and help address anything. Or if you're preparing for a big initiative that's kind of complicated, we can definitely walk you through some best practices to support